The holding cell smelled like bleach and old fear. Nadia Russ had been in worse places. She told herself that every few minutes, like a prayer, because the alternative was admitting that she had no idea how this night ended in anything other than a body bag. She sat on the narrow metal bench with her wrists folded in her lap, her left eye swollen nearly shut, her bottom lip split where Derek had caught her with his ring. The fluorescent light above her buzzed in that particular frequency that lodged behind the eyes like a needle. She didn't look up. Looking up meant looking at the officer behind the processing desk, and looking at him meant seeing the way he had looked at Derek when they were both brought in, the small nod, the brief softening of his expression, the recognition of a man who knew another man's name without being told it. Derek Holt was 3 cells down. She could hear him on his phone, his voice low and conversational, like a man making dinner reservations. That was always the thing about Derek that people who didn't know him never understood. He sounded reasonable. He sounded measured. He sounded like the kind of man who coached youth soccer and remembered everyone's birthday and never, ever lost his temper. He had broken 2 of her ribs 8 months ago. He had put a cigarette out on the inside of her wrist 6 months ago. Tonight he had followed her to the parking lot of Carmen's Diner, where she worked doubles 4 nights a week, and he had grabbed her by the hair in full view of the street and told her that if she ever had another man speak to her at that counter, he would bury her somewhere her mother would never find. She had scratched his face. She was proud of that. She hadn't planned it. Something animal in her had simply refused, and her nails had found his cheek before her brain registered the decision, and there was a particular satisfaction in having left a mark on him before he put her on the ground. A neighbor had called 911. That was how they both ended up here. The officer behind the desk, Sergeant Palermo, his nameplate said, had taken Derek's statement first. Derek had done the thing Derek always did. He had been calm and cooperative, and his story had been clean and sequential, and delivered with the practiced patience of a man describing a minor inconvenience. He had called her unstable. He had said the word asterisk volatile twice, and both times Sergeant Palermo had written something down. When it was Nadia's turn, she had told the truth. The whole truth, without pausing, without softening the parts that made her look desperate and frightened. She had named dates. She had named locations. She had described the cigarette burn and offered her wrist and watched Sergeant Palermo study it for a moment before he wrote something down and moved on to the next question. She did not feel seen. She sat on the bench now and watched the wall and listened to Derek's voice 3 cells down and tried to calculate. He had a lawyer on retainer. She knew this because he had told her once, casually, the way he said most threatening things slipped into the conversation like a knife between ribs. "I have a lawyer on retainer, sweetheart. He has made more problems than yours disappear. His family had money. Old money, not the kind that could be counted, but the kind that was woven into the way certain doors opened, and certain conversations ended, and certain names were never written down. She had $40 in her checking account, and a mother in Trenton who didn't know where she was. She pulled her knees to her chest and pressed her back against the cold concrete and let herself do the math she had been avoiding since the handcuffs went on. Derek was going to walk out of here tonight. He had done it before, twice before, in 2 different cities, which was a thing she had only learned 6 weeks ago when she had finally made herself look. He was going to walk out, and Sergeant Palermo was going to watch him go. And then Nadia was going to have a problem that no fluorescent light or metal bench or stay-tissued blanket was going to solve. She pressed her mouth against her knees so her voice would carry nowhere. "He'll kill me tonight," she whispered. "If they let him go first, he'll kill me tonight." She wasn't talking to anyone. There was no one to talk to. The cell to her left was empty. The cell to her right had been occupied when she arrived. A man already seated, already still, the way certain objects are still. But the dividing wall was solid concrete to the height of her shoulder, and she hadn't looked at him, and he hadn't spoken, and she had decided that silence was the safest currency in a place like this. She pressed her mouth against her knees, and the words went nowhere. She thought about the emergency number she'd been given by the women's shelter 3 months ago, the card she kept in the lining of her coat. Her coat was in the property room. She thought about the name of the advocate, Lisa something. Lisa with the brown hair and the direct, steady gaze who had said, "You call me when you're ready." And Nadia had not been ready then, and she was not ready now in any meaningful sense, except that readiness might no longer be the relevant question. She thought about the back exit of the diner, which she had memorized in the 4th month, and the fire escape at her apartment, which she had tested in the 5th month, and the go bag under her bed that had $300 cash and a change of clothes and her birth certificate in a Ziploc bag, which she had assembled in the 6th month. All the small practical preparations of a woman who was learning a particular kind of geography, the geography of escape routes. The geography didn't help her here. She heard a sound, not Derek's voice that had gone quiet, which was in some ways worse. A different sound, something settling. The man in the next cell had shifted his weight. She kept her face against her knees. She heard him breathe. That was all. Just a slow, even breath, the way a man breathes when he is thinking. Then she heard his voice. It was quiet. It was not directed at her. It was directed at someone else, a name said once flatly, with the certainty of a man who knows he will be answered. She couldn't make out the name. The wall took most of it. What she heard was the quality of the voice rather than its content. The complete absence of urgency, the complete absence of doubt, the way certain words land not because they are loud, but because they carry weight. She told herself it was nothing. She pressed her eyes shut. Behind her, the wall was cold and solid and had been there for decades. And she was 27 years old and her left eye was swollen, and she had $40 in her account. And she had told the truth to a man who had written it down and moved on. And somewhere down the corridor, the man who had put his cigarette out on her wrist was making phone calls in a voice like dinner reservations. She felt, in a very quiet and private way, completely alone. She had felt this before. She was, in fact, almost accustomed to it. That was perhaps the most frightening thing she had ever understood about herself. The way you could become accustomed to it, the way aloneness could stop being acute and become chronic, the way you could stop registering it, the way you stopped registering a sound that played on a long loop. But tonight the aloneness had a particular quality. It had edges. It pressed in from every direction at once. She did not cry. She hadn't cried in 3 months. She wasn't sure when exactly she had stopped, only that one morning she had noticed the absence of it, the dry, practical calm that had replaced it, and she had understood that her body had made a decision without consulting her. Crying was expensive. Crying took resources she needed elsewhere. She sat with her back against the wall and her eyes closed and did not cry, and listened to Derek's silence 3 cells down and waited. The voice came from her right. She almost didn't register it as directed at her. It was that quiet. Not a whisper, nothing so effortful as a whisper. Just a low, even statement placed with precision. "You're not going to be here when he leaves." She opened her eyes. She turned her head slowly, the way you turn when you are not sure what you'll see. The wall between their cells was solid concrete for most of its height. At the top, where the wall met the ceiling, there was a gap, maybe 8 inches of open space, covered with a length of heavy steel mesh. Through the mesh she could see almost nothing. The angle was wrong, a slice of light, the edge of a shoulder in a dark jacket. She said nothing. The voice came again, same register, same unhurried certainty. "I said you're not going to be here when he leaves." "You heard that," she said. Not a question. She had said it quietly herself. But she had said it, and this cell was concrete and acoustics in concrete were a particular thing. "I heard it." She straightened slightly. Her ribs protested. She ignored them. "Then you know I'm not exactly in a position to make that happen," she said, "unless you have a suggestion." The briefest pause. She had the impression, the strange, unverifiable impression, that the pause was not uncertainty but assessment, like a man looking at a map and confirming what he already knew. "Don't worry about the position," the voice said. "That's already handled." She looked at the mesh. She still couldn't see his face. Just that slice, the shoulder, the dark jacket, the stillness. She should have dismissed it. She knew that. She knew the rational protocol. You do not trust a stranger through a wall, in a jail cell, in the middle of the night, when he says that's already handled about something that hasn't been handled by anyone in 14 months, including lawyers and shelter coordinators and 2 separate police reports. You do not trust that. That is not the way trust works or should work, and she was not a person who trusted carelessly. She had not been reckless with trust even before Derek. She had always required evidence, always moved on data rather than feeling. But there was something in the voice. She was precise enough about language to identify it even in the heightened, exhausted state of that night. It was the absence of need. He was not saying I can handle it the way a man says it when he wants something in return, when the offer is already a negotiation. He was saying it the way you state a fact about logistics. There was no salesmanship in it, no persuasion, just a flat statement placed on the table and left there for her to examine. "You don't know who I am," she said. It came out more honest than she intended. What she meant was, you don't know who he is, you don't know what he has, you don't know how many times people have said things like this and been wrong. "I know enough," the voice said. "Nadia." She went very still. She had not told anyone her name tonight. She had given it to Sergeant Palermo in the intake process, over the desk in the main room, before they had walked her to this cell. She had not said it loudly. She had not said it in this direction. "How do you know my name?" she said. Silence, and then, without any particular emphasis, as if the answer were obvious and the question therefore unnecessary. "I know most things." She studied the mesh, the slice of jacket, the absolute quality of the stillness. "Who are you?" she asked. He didn't answer that. What he said was, "How long has he been following you?" She opened her mouth, closed it. "A year," she said finally. 14 months. Before the parking lot tonight." "Yes." "And before that, where did you meet him?" It wasn't a question. She answered it anyway. "Work. He came into the diner. He knew how to be charming for a while." "For a while," he repeated, flat, like a man filing something away. "For about 6 months," she said. "Then it changed." Silence again, but not empty silence. Something occupying the silence. She had met men who were loud when they were powerful, who used volume as demonstration, who filled rooms with their voices because they needed you to know they were there. She had also, in a different kind of life and a different kind of room, briefly known men who were powerful in the opposite way, who took up space by removing it from everyone else, who stood at the center of things through some law of gravity she had never fully understood. The man in the next cell was the second kind. She knew this the way she knew certain things instinctively, the way you know ice before you test it, by its surface and its particular silence. "Do you have a phone?" he asked. "They have it at the desk." "Family?" "My mother, in Trenton. She doesn't know any of this." "A friend?" She thought about that honestly. She had not had what she would call a friend in 2 years. Derek had made friendship expensive, and she had paid the cost without fully accounting for it until recently. There were people she knew, people who had once known her. The distance between those things was Derek-shaped and could not be said in a single sentence. "Not close," she said. "Somewhere to go tonight." She didn't answer that. "Nadia." His voice was the same, no impatience, no pressure, just her name used like a key. "If I answer that honestly," she said carefully, "it just confirms what you already heard me say." "It does," he agreed. She folded her hands in her lap. The split in her lip had stopped bleeding and was now at the dull, specific ache stage. Her eye had mostly closed. She probably looked, she thought, like exactly what she was. That thought used to make her want to straighten her spine and lift her chin and present something other than the truth. Tonight she was past that. "No," she said. "I don't have somewhere to go tonight. My apartment, he has a key. I changed the locks 4 months ago and he had a new one cut. I didn't ask how." She paused. "I have a go bag under my bed. If I could get there first, I'd be fine. But he's faster and he has people and I..." She stopped, started again. "I'm very tired of being careful." The words came out with more feeling than she had intended. She pressed her lips together. "That part I understand," the voice said. There was something in it. Not sympathy exactly. Sympathy was softer, more liquid. This was something harder and more complicated. Something that recognized the specific quality of a person who has been careful for a very long time and has reached the end of what carefulness can accomplish. "Why are you in here?" she asked. "It's a misunderstanding." "Is it?" "No," he said, "but that's what it is." She almost smiled. She stopped herself. Then she decided that stopping herself was the kind of thing she had been doing too long, the kind of small self-management that added up to something corrosive, and she let the almost smile happen. "Fair enough," she said. His name, she would learn later, was Luca Ferrante. She would learn other things about that name, what it meant in certain rooms, what it made certain people do, how it functioned in the particular ecosystem of this city's eastern neighborhoods, the way certain words function in certain languages, not merely describing a thing but summoning it. She would learn that the name Ferrante was attached to 4 square miles of waterfront real estate and 3 generations of decisions that had never once been written down. She would learn that it was a name that police officers knew, and federal agents knew, and certain judges knew, and most of them had, at various points in their careers, made the practical decision to know it from a particular distance. She learned none of that in the cell. In the cell, she learned only the voice, and the stillness, and the quality of the attention. She learned that he listened the way no one had listened to her in a very long time, without commentary, without reframing, without the particular male habit of turning her sentences into problems he could solve before she finished statting them. She talked and he listened, and occasionally he said a word that was not a response exactly but more like a marker, when asterisk, or and then asterisk, or just her name, and she found herself saying things she had not planned to say, the way you find yourself saying things in the dark when the dark becomes a particular kind of container. She told him about the first bruise. She told him about the way she had explained it to herself, the stress he was under, the pressure from his family, the one bad night that would not repeat. She told him about the way that narrative had a half-life, how you kept investing in it past the point of return because the alternative was admitting what you already knew, and what you already knew would require a kind of courage she hadn't yet located. She told him about the specific quality of the second time. The first time you could explain. The second time was different. The second time forced a reckoning with the architecture of what you had built around the first time, and the reckoning was worse than the incident itself because it was internal and had no exit routes. She told him how she had stood in her bathroom the morning after the second time and looked at herself in the mirror and made a decision. Not the right decision, she had stayed, for reasons she could articulate clearly and that were not without their own logic, but a different kind of decision. A decision to pay attention, to keep records, to be strategic rather than hopeful. She told him about the journal. He listened without commentary. She told him about the call she had finally made to the shelter in the 7th month. How she had sat in her car in the parking lot of the diner for 20 minutes with the phone in her hand before she dialed. How the woman who answered, not Lisa, a different woman, a volunteer with a voice that was warm without being performative, had simply said, "I'm glad you called. Take your time." She told him that those 4 words had done something she had not expected, which was to make her cry for the first time in weeks, and she had sat in the parking lot and cried, and then gone into her shift and made coffee and taken orders and done everything correctly. And at the end of the shift, she had folded the information they'd given her into the lining of her coat. She told him about the planning. He listened to all of it. "You're smarter than he knows," Luca said. "Most people are," she said. "He doesn't actually pay attention to people, he monitors them. There's a difference." Another pause. This one felt different from the others, something in it she couldn't name. "Yes," he said quietly, "there is." She pressed her back against the wall and looked at the ceiling and thought about the go bag under the bed and tried to calculate the variables. Derek would be released first. She was almost certain of that. Sergeant Palermo's body language had said everything a body language ever said. Derek would be released, and he would make a call or two in the parking lot, and he would go somewhere. Not her apartment, not immediately, because Derek was strategic in a way that people underestimated because his violence was so personalized, it didn't look strategic. He would go somewhere and wait for the temperature to drop, for the immediate event to recede, and then he would make his move in the particular window between public incident and private reckoning. She had maybe 3 hours from his release. She had no phone, no car, no friend she could call, and her coat with its shelter card was in the property room. Luca, she said. The name came out naturally. She hadn't planned to use it. She had heard it when Sergeant Palermo had brought him in, overheard it. Really, in the way you overhear things you're trying not to pay attention to, through the peripheral channels that stay open even when you're managing everything else. Mr. Ferrante. Set in a register she had recognized immediately as different from the one used for her. A silence, then, yes. When they release you, she said, is there something do you have? She stopped. She was asking a stranger in a jail cell for help. She had told herself years ago she would never be the kind of person who needed that. She understood now what a luxury that conviction had been, how it had belonged to an earlier version of her with different options. Is there anything you can actually do about the getting out first part? It's already done, he said. She turned her head. The mesh, the slice of jacket. What does that mean? It means that in about 8 minutes, someone is going to come to that desk with paperwork. And when they leave, you're going to leave with them. She stared at the mesh. You made a phone call, she said. I made a phone call. From in here. The sergeant was kind enough to allow it. She absorbed this. The sergeant who had looked at Derek with recognition and had written things down and had moved on from her wrist. That sergeant had allowed a phone call. Who are you? She said again. This time he answered. Luca Ferrante. A pause. My family has some interests in this part of the city. She sat with that for a moment. Interests, she said. Restaurants, real estate, some other things. The sergeant knows your family. Most people in this neighborhood do. She looked at her hands. The fluorescent light found the cigarette burn scar on her wrist and illuminated it in a way that made it look like something printed there, like a marking. She had spent months rescenting it. Tonight it simply looked like evidence, and evidence was at least something true. Why, she said. It was the only question that mattered. Why what? Why does any of this involve you? You heard someone talking to themselves in a jail cell. That's not people don't do things about that. People don't make phone calls about that. The pause was longer this time. Someone does, he said. And there was something in the way he said it that closed the question. Not evasively, not the way people close questions they don't want to answer. More the way you close a chapter. A specific, clean finality. She let it be closed. If you're new here, welcome. And if you've been with us a while, you already know what this channel does. Hit like and subscribe if this one's got you. We put everything into these stories, and every single one of you makes it possible to keep going. 7 minutes later, a woman came through the main door. Nadia heard her before she saw her, heels on concrete, unhurried, the particular rhythm of someone who had walked into every room they had ever entered without adjusting their pace for anyone. She heard Sergeant Palermo's greeting, which was markedly different from the greeting he had given Nadia, and she heard paper rustling, and she heard a brief exchange in voices too low to make out, and then footsteps again. The cell door opened. The woman was maybe 40, in a dark coat, with reading glasses pushed up into her hair, and the specific weariness of someone who had been pulled from something important but was refusing to let it show. She held a folder. Ms. Russo, she said, I'm Carla Bianchi. I'm an attorney. You're being released on your own recognizance pending review. Do you have belongings at the desk? Nadia stood up. Her ribs objected. She kept her face level. My coat and my phone, she said. We'll get those. Carla Bianchi looked at her, a professional look, thorough, the kind that took inventory quickly and stored it efficiently. Her gaze moved to Nadia's eye, to her lip, and then back up, and something crossed her expression that was not pity but was adjacent to it, if pity had a sharper, more purposeful edge. Is the other individual still on premises? Nadia asked. Mr. Holt is being held for additional processing, Carla said. Her voice was clean and factual. He'll be here for a while. Nadia exhaled. She hadn't let herself do that, exhale fully. since the handcuffs went on. The air came out of her in one slow, complete release, and she felt the specific loosening that follows it, the way a fist opens, and she stood in the open cell door and let herself have 3 seconds of it. Then she followed Carla Bianchi to the desk. She collected her coat and her phone. She put the coat on and felt for the shelter card in the lining, still there, that small laminated rectangle, Lisa with the brown hair's number and the address in the 7th block of Meridian Avenue. She held it in her palm for a moment. At the desk, Sergeant Palermo did not look at her. She noticed that. She filed it. Carla Bianchi walked her to the front door and held it open, and the night came in cold and clean-smelling after the bleach and the fluorescent light, and Nadia stepped out onto the front steps and stopped. A car was parked at the curb. Black, low, expensive in the way that expensive things are when they don't need to announce themselves. The engine was running. The driver's side window was down, but she couldn't see the driver from this angle. Carla Bianchi stepped up beside her. "There's a car," she said. It was not an explanation exactly. It was more of an acknowledgement. "You don't have to use it. That's entirely your choice. But if you have nowhere safe to go tonight, there's a car." Nadia looked at it. She thought about the go bag under the bed. She thought about the apartment on the 4th floor of the building on Decatur Street, and the new key Derek had cut, and the window that faced the alley, and the 3 hours she'd estimated. She thought about $40 and a phone at 12% battery, and a mother in Trenton who didn't know any of this. She thought about the voice through the concrete wall, the absolute quality of the stillness. "You're not going to be here when he leaves." "Where does it go?" she asked. "Somewhere safe," Carla said. "That's all I'm authorized to tell you." Nadia put the shelter card in her pocket. She walked to the car. The driver was a young man who didn't speak, which she appreciated. He drove smoothly and without apparent destination anxiety, which meant he knew where he was going. She watched the city pass outside the window, the eastern neighborhoods, the old blocks that still had the particular texture of immigrant pragmatism, 3 flat buildings and corner delis and church steps worn smooth, streets named after saints. Her phone had 12%. She called her mother. "Nadia." Her mother's voice was the particular texture of a woman who answers calls at 2 a.m. without complaint, because she has been waiting for them. "I'm okay," Nadia said. "I'm out, I'm in a car." "Where are you going?" "I don't know yet. I'll call you when I get there." A pause. Her mother had learned, over 14 months of careful non-interference, the architecture of what not to ask. "Are you hurt?" "Nothing serious." "Nadia." "Mom, I'm okay, I'll call you." She hung up before her mother could say the thing her mother always almost said, the thing that lived just behind every other sentence, the accumulated weight of a woman watching her daughter from a distance of 60 miles, while understanding clearly that the distance was not the thing that couldn't be crossed. They drove for 9 minutes. She knew because she watched the clock. 9 minutes took them out of the precinct neighborhood, through 2 blocks of warehouse conversion and 1 block of old restaurants with Italian names on awnings that hadn't been changed in 30 years, and then down a narrow street she didn't know, and through a gate that opened before the car reached it. The building was 4 stories, red brick, the kind of building that had once been something industrial and had been converted into something residential with enough money and enough patience to keep the industrial bones intact. There was no visible signage. There were cameras at the corners, angled down. The driver stopped at the entrance. He got out and opened her door without speaking, and she got out and stood on the sidewalk and looked at the building and thought about all the decisions she had made in the last 4 hours and tried to determine whether this was a reasonable continuation of those decisions or a departure from them into something she didn't have the vocabulary for yet. She decided it was a continuation. She went inside. The apartment was on the 3rd floor. It was clean and spare and had been prepared by someone who understood the specific requirements of a woman arriving without luggage. There were clothes folded on the bed, her approximate size, practical things, jeans and a sweater, and a change of underwear still in packaging. There was food in the kitchen. There was a phone charger on the nightstand. There was a lock on the bedroom door that she tested immediately, and it worked, and she stood in the locked room for a moment and felt the specific strange quality of safety. How unfamiliar it was, how it sat in the body like something too large, how it required adjustment. She sat on the edge of the bed first, just sat. She had not simply sat, without calculating something, without monitoring something, without listening for sounds in the hallway or the parking lot or the street below, in a very long time. She sat and let the room be quiet around her, and felt her own heartbeat slow from the elevated register it had held all night toward something closer to its actual tempo. She looked at the folded clothes. Someone had thought about that. Someone had known her approximate size and had laid out practical things, not a statement, not charity presented as charity, just clothes of the right kind for a woman who had none. She thought about the phone charger on the nightstand. Someone had thought about that too. The specificity of the consideration moved her more than a grand gesture would have, because grand gestures were often about the giver, and this was entirely about the recipient. It was the consideration of someone who thought about what was needed, without making the need into something dramatic. She showered. She ate something, bread and cheese, standing at the kitchen counter, because she hadn't eaten since the lunch break at the diner, and her body had been running on adrenaline for so long it had stopped informing her of its needs. She changed into the clothes someone had thought to provide. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, with her phone at 40% when the knock came. It was not aggressive. 3 measured sounds. The knock of a man who has already decided you will open the door but who extends the courtesy of asking. She sat for a moment. Then she opened it. Luca Ferrante was taller than the voice had suggested, which was irrational, she knew, because voices didn't have heights, but she had constructed something in the dark, and the reality was different from the construction. He was tall, and he was lean in the way that men are lean when they work at it, and he wore a dark jacket over a white shirt that should have looked simple and somehow did not. He was perhaps 38. His eyes were very dark and very still, and they moved across her face once, briefly, cataloging the eye, the lip, the posture, the set of her hands, and then settled. He had a scar on his jaw, a thin one, old enough to have gone fully silver, the kind that happens early and stays. He was not, she thought, conventionally handsome in a way you would describe to someone. He was the kind of man whose face you described by what it did rather than what it looked like, the economy of the expression, the absence of anything performed. "You found the charger," he said. "I did. And food." "Yes." He leaned a shoulder against the doorframe. Not proprietarily, more the way a man leans when he is deciding how much space to take. It read, unexpectedly, as considerate. "How are your ribs?" he said. She blinked. "How do you know about my ribs?" "You've been breathing carefully since you stood up in the cell. 3 months ago, minimum, old injury." She looked at him. 8 months, she said, 2 on the left side. He nodded, as if that confirmed something, as if the timeline mattered. "There's a doctor in the morning if you want it, not a hospital, someone private." "You have a private doctor." "I have several private doctors." He said it without inflection, the way you state a fact about inventory. "None of them will ask you questions you don't want to answer." She leaned against the doorframe on her side, mirroring the posture without planning to. "You do this," she said slowly, "often. The phone call, the car, the—" She gestured at the room behind her. He considered the question. "Not often," he said. "Occasionally." "And what do you want for it?" She asked it directly because she was 27 years old, and she had already learned one lesson the expensive way about men who arrived with solutions. She asked it with her eyes on his, measuring the microsecond before the answer, because that was where the truth lived. He looked at her for a moment. "I want," he said carefully, "for you to make it to tomorrow, and the day after, that's the extent of it." She studied his face, the scar, the stillness. "Why?" She said it the same way she had in the cell, the only question. "Because I heard you," he said simply, "and I had the means to do something about it." A beat. "My father used to say that having means without using them is just a different kind of violence. I've disagreed with him about most things, not that. She absorbed this. It was not a simple answer, but it was a true one. She could feel the shape of truth, had learned its texture over years of learning the texture of its opposite. Your father sounds like a complicated man, she said. He was, Luca said. He was also right about that one thing. She looked at the room behind her, the bed with its folded clothes, the charger doing its quiet work on the nightstand. She looked back at him. The man in the cell, she said. Sergeant Palermo knew who you were. Yes. And Derek Holt is still in that cell. He'll remain there until the morning, at minimum. There was something in the paperwork that required additional review. Something. A discrepancy, Luca said. In the timeline of his statement, these things take time to sort out. She was quiet for a moment. He'll come for me, she said. Not tonight, but he'll come. I know. And you're saying what, that this is? She stopped. I can't stay here, I can't just, this isn't a solution, this is a night. Tonight is a night, he agreed. Tomorrow is a different problem. We can talk about tomorrow in the morning if you want. You don't have to decide anything tonight. She looked at him. You're very calm, she said. I've been told. It doesn't bother you, any of this. The middle of the night that you don't seem bothered. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. More like the acknowledgement that a smile would be appropriate if the moment called for it. I've had more disruptive nights, he said. She thought about that. She thought about what kind of life produced a man who fielded calls from jail and sent cars in the middle of the night, and stood in doorways at 3 a.m. discussing paperwork discrepancies in a tone of complete tranquility. I'm not going to ask. She said. I know. I'm going to sleep, she said. And in the morning I'm going to, she stopped. She didn't know exactly what she was going to do in the morning. The go bag was still under the bed in her apartment, and $300 was not nothing, but it was also not a plan. In the morning, Luca said, there'll be coffee, and we can talk or not talk, and you can tell me what you need, and I'll tell you what I can actually do. He paused. I'll also tell you what I expect from you in return, which is nothing except that you be honest with me. I find that's the only thing that actually works. She looked at his face. Honest about what? She said. About what you want. Not what you think you should want, or what's practical or what's possible. What you actually want. Because that's where any real plan starts. She was quiet for a long moment. I want him to stop, she said. It came out simple and certain, the way things come out when you stop managing them. I don't want to be afraid anymore. I don't want to spend the rest of my life calculating exit routes. I want to be able to walk into a room and not, she stopped. That's what I want. Luca Ferrante looked at her for a moment with those very still, very dark eyes. Okay, he said, like it was simple, like it was a beginning rather than an impossibility. Okay, she repeated, testing the word. He straightened off the doorframe. Lock the door, he said. Sleep if you can, I'll be down the hall. He turned to leave. Luca, she said his name, and he stopped. She wasn't sure what she'd intended to say. She was standing in the doorway of a room in a building she didn't know, in clothes that weren't hers, with a phone at 40% and a split lip and 2 healed ribs, and the most exhausted she had been in her entire adult life. Thank you, she said. It was insufficient, she knew that, but it was true. He turned back just enough to look at her over his shoulder. There was something in the expression, something that crossed it briefly and was gone, something warmer than the rest of his face suggested was available. Lock the door, he said again. She did. She slept for 6 hours without dreaming, which was the most she had slept in one stretch since spring, and she woke to daylight through the blinds and the smell of coffee. She lay still for a moment and listened to the building around her. It was quiet in a particular way, not empty, but organized. The quiet of a place that ran on systems. She heard something below, a door, 2 voices, words she couldn't make out. She heard the particular settling sound of a building in cold weather. She was not afraid. She noticed this the way you notice the absence of pain after pain has been present for so long you stopped registering its presence. The fear had a weight she had been carrying for 14 months, and this morning it was not there, and her body felt it as a kind of lightness that was almost disorienting. She got up. She brushed her teeth with the toothbrush that had been left on the bathroom counter, still packaged. She looked at herself in the mirror. The eye was spectacularly purple, the full range of it, that deep, brutal violet that meant the blood had had time to spread. The lip was swollen but closed. She pressed her fingers gently along her ribcage and found everything still in its place. The old healed injury, nothing more than a memory of ache. She looked at herself for a long moment. She had spent 14 months looking at herself in mirrors and calculating how to cover, how to explain, how to present a surface that would not require conversation. This morning she found she had no interest in any of that. The marks on her face were evidence. She was tired of treating evidence like something to apologize for. She went to the kitchen. Luca was at the counter with a cup of coffee and his phone face down on the marble. He looked up when she came in. His eyes went briefly to her face and then to hers, and he said nothing about what he saw, which was the right thing. "Coffee," he said. It was not a question. "Please." He poured it. Black first. He pushed the cup toward her and indicated the small arrangement beside it, sugar and cream, and she added both and watched the color change. He said nothing while she drank it. She was beginning to understand. Something he did deliberately, the giving of space, the refusal to fill it. Most people were uncomfortable with quiet. They generated words to cover it like blankets over broken furniture. Luca seemed to experience quiet the way a person experiences light, as a natural condition, one that neither required explanation nor produced discomfort. She drank her coffee, and he drank his, and the morning came through the window and lay in lines across the kitchen floor. She had expected to feel strange here in the daylight. The night had its own permissions. Things were possible in cells and darkness that the ordinary morning tended to revoke, the way certain conversations could only exist in certain conditions and dissolved when the conditions changed. She had expected to feel the awkwardness of daylight, the reversion to the prior terms of things, the renegotiation. She did not feel that. She felt instead a very simple and specific thing: continuity. The morning was the same as the night before. The man at the counter was the same. The quality of the attention was the same. Nothing had been performed, and therefore nothing needed to be revised. She wrapped both hands around her cup. "Tell me what you're thinking," he said eventually. "I'm thinking about the go bag," she said. "Under the bed. 300 cash, clothes, documents. If I can get that, I have options. We can get it this morning." She looked at him. "He has a key," she said. "He's not at your apartment," Lucas said. "They held him until around 4 a.m, then processed him out. There's only so long a paperwork discrepancy can run. But by then you were already gone, and he has no way of knowing where." He paused. "He went to his brother's house. Will be in and out before he makes his next move." She absorbed the asterisk, we asterisk. She absorbed the "we've been monitoring him" of it. She put these things in order in her mind. "I want to understand something," she said. "Ask." "Yesterday you were in a holding cell. This morning you're drinking coffee in this." She gestured at the kitchen, the building, the organized quiet of the place. "Who are you, actually? Not interests in the neighborhood asterisk. Who are you?" He looked at her steadily. "I run things," he said. "This part of the city, some of the port, some other things." He set his cup down. "My grandfather came from Calabria in 1951 with $14 and a name that meant nothing to anyone here. He built something, and my father built more, and now it's mine." He said it without any particular pride or shame, just the way you state a lineage. "Most of what I do is legitimate. Some of it isn't. All of it is mine, and I take responsibility for every piece of it." She watched his face. "And Derek Holt," she said. "He's nothing to you before last night." Before last night, I'd never heard his name. And now? Something changed in his expression, just slightly. A precision arrived, the way it arrives in someone who is about to do something specific. "Now," he said, "he's a problem I intend to resolve." She kept her voice even. "How?" That depends on what you want, he said. I told you last night I'll tell you what I can do, but you tell me what you want first. That's not a courtesy, it's how I operate. She thought about what she had said the night before. I want him to stop. I don't want to be afraid anymore. She thought about what stopping meant in the practical, operational sense. She thought about the 2 cities and the 2 prior incidents she had found in the court records, the 2 women who had presumably gone through their own versions of this sequence and had arrived at some outcome she didn't know. I want him gone, she said. Not hurt, not disappeared. I want him accountable. I want there to be a record. I want the next woman he finds to have something to be able to say, there's a record, there's a pattern, there's evidence. She paused. He's done this before, 2 other women. I found the records, if there were some way to put all of it together. There is, Luca said. She looked at him. The attorney who got you out last night, he said. Carla. She specializes in exactly this kind of case. She has resources, investigators, witnesses, the kind of documentation that doesn't disappear. He was quiet for a moment. Derek Holt has done business with a man named Soriano for the past 3 years. Soriano owes me a conversation. Inside that conversation, there are things about Holt that the district attorney's office would find very interesting. She sat with this. You can do that, she said. Make that happen. I can make that happen. She was quiet for a moment. Show me, she said. He looked at her. Not as proof, she said quickly. I believe you. I want to understand what it actually looks like. What you mean when you say you can make something happen. He considered this. Then he picked up his phone from the counter and made a call. 1 ring. 2. A man answered and Luca said 3 words that she couldn't fully hear, and then he set the phone down. 12 minutes later, there was a knock at the door of the apartment. She stayed in the kitchen. She heard Luca open the door, heard 2 sets of footsteps enter, heard the door close. She heard a voice, not Luca's, a different voice, older, rougher, with a quality in it she recognized immediately as the quality of a man who is not accustomed to being summoned and is managing his reaction to it. Luca, a pause. It's 7 in the morning. Sit down, Sal. She heard the sound of a chair. There's a man, Luca said. She could hear him clearly from the kitchen. He didn't raise his voice. He never raised his voice. His name is Derek Holt. He's been doing business with you for 3 years out of the Meridian Street operation. Silence. I don't. Don't, Luca said. 1 word. The quality of it was not threatening exactly. It was more like the closing of a door, the sound of an option being removed from the table without ceremony. Another silence. What do you need? The older voice said. Everything, Luca said. Financial records, the arrangement with his family, the favors called in at the 2nd precinct. Everything you know about him goes to Carla Bianchi by end of day. Luca, if I do that, the Holt family. The Holt family, Luca said quietly, is going to have considerably larger concerns than your name on a document. That's being handled separately. What I need from you is the paper trail. A pause. Sal, look at me. She couldn't see it from the kitchen. She didn't need to. She heard the silence that followed, the particular quality of a silence in which one man looks at another man, and something is transferred that doesn't require language. End of day, the older voice said. End of day, Luca confirmed. Footsteps, the door, quiet. She stood in the kitchen with her coffee cup and waited. Luca came back around the corner. He looked exactly the same jacket, same stillness, same economy of expression. That, she said carefully, is what you mean. Yes. She sat with it. She thought about the 12 minutes from phone call to knock. She thought about the way the older man's voice had moved through its registers, irritation, resistance, calculation, and then the specific flatness of a decision made under pressure. She thought about the 1 word, don't asterisk, and the quality of it, the way it had closed an option without raising a temperature. She thought about 14 months of Derek's voice on the phone in dinner reservation tones, while sergeants wrote things down and moved on. Okay, she said, for the 3rd time. And this time it carried something different, not acceptance, not relief exactly. Something more like the specific calm of a woman who has spent a very long time doing math in the dark and has finally found a variable that changes the equation. Why, the word again, her word, the only one that cut to the center. He looked at her across the kitchen counter in the morning light, and for a moment, his face was doing something more than it usually allowed. Something that moved in the deeper registers, something that cost more than the surface expression. Because it's right, he said, quietly, flatly, the way he said things when they were simply true. Because I sat in that cell and I listened to you and I heard a woman who had spent a year being very careful and very brave and very alone, and I had the means to do something about it. He paused. I've made a great many decisions in my life that I can defend as practical. This one I can defend as right. They're not usually the same thing. When they are, I pay attention. He was quiet for another moment, and she had the sense, the very specific sense, that there was more, and that he was deciding how much of it to say. He was not a man who withheld out of evasion. He withheld out of precision, out of the discipline of saying only what was true and not adding the decorative layer that most people added around truth to make it more acceptable, more cushioned, more presentable. My mother, he said then, left when I was 9. She had her reasons. Some of them I understand now that I didn't understand then. He looked at the counter for a moment, a pause that was about the past rather than the present. There was a man in her life before my father who was the kind of man Derek Holt is. She spent years afterward being very careful, very alone. He looked back up. I didn't know any of that until I was 22. By then she had built herself something different. A different city, different name, different life. She did it herself, every piece of it. She looked at him. Is she alive? Nadia asked. Yes, a pause. She lives in Genoa. We speak once a month. And the man? He had an accident, Lucas said, in the particular tone of a man who has filed a thing away completely. A long time ago, before I knew. She sat with that. I'm sorry, she said, about the years you didn't know. He looked at her steadily. So am I, he said. She looked at her coffee cup. She thought about practical and right and the space between them, and she thought about 14 months of exotrute geography and cigarette burn scars and go-bag contents. And she thought about the kind of aloneness that becomes chronic, and she thought about standing in the holding cell doorway breathing the cold air. Okay, she said, borrowing his word, testing it again. He looked at her, and something very brief passed across his face. The acknowledgement of a decision made, not with drama, but with the quiet recognition of a threshold crossed. Okay, he said. They went to her apartment at 10 in the morning. He sent 2 men ahead. She didn't know what they checked or what they cleared. She only knew that when the car pulled up and she went up the stairs, the hallway was empty and her door was unlocked, and there was a man she didn't know standing at the end of the corridor with his hands in his jacket pockets and his gaze moving without appearing to move. She went in. She went directly to the bedroom. Under the bed, behind the winter box of extra blankets, the bag was exactly where she'd left it. She unzipped it and checked. Cash, clothes, documents, all present. She added 3 things. A photograph of her mother from the dresser, the earrings her grandmother had left her that lived in the top drawer, and the journal she had been keeping since the 8th month, the one with dates and descriptions and evidence that she had written for reasons she hadn't fully articulated at the time, but which now seemed perfectly clear. She stood in the middle of the bedroom and looked at the room she had lived in for 2 years. She looked at it the way you look at a place you are leaving for the last time, not with grief exactly, but with the specific acknowledgement that one chapter closes and another begins, and the closing is real, and the beginning is unknown, and both of those things are true simultaneously. She picked up the bag. She left. She did not look back. 3 weeks later, Derek Holt was arrested on 3 separate counts, including 2 charges that drew on the documentation of previous incidents. The 2 other women, who had been found and who had agreed, with the support of Carla Bianchi and 2 investigators whose methods Nadia chose not to examine too closely, to add their accounts to the record. The arrest happened on a Tuesday. She was at her new job, 3 days in. The chef had already learned her name and used it without the particular loaded quality that names sometimes carry. Just her name, clean and functional when Carla called. She stepped into the back hallway by the walk-in and listened. "It's done," Carla said. "They picked him up an hour ago. 3 counts. The federal interest in the Soriano connection elevated it out of the local precinct entirely, which means Sergeant Palermo's relationship with the Holt family is no longer a relevant variable." Nadia stood in the hallway with the cold seeping through the walk-in door and felt the words settle. "The other 2 women," she said. "Both confirmed, both on record. The Baltimore woman, her name is Diane. She said she'd been waiting 2 years for someone to find her." A pause. "She asked me to pass something along to you," she said. "Thank you for being the one who looked." Nadia pressed her back against the wall. "I'll call her," she said. "She'd like that." She hung up. She stood in the hallway for a moment longer than necessary. She was thinking about Diane in Baltimore who had been waiting 2 years for someone to look. She was thinking about the other woman in Newark whose name she didn't know yet. She was thinking about the journal under her bed, the old bed, in the old apartment, which she had left behind, the one with dates and descriptions and evidence written for reasons she hadn't fully articulated at the time. She had written it because she had understood, on some operational level, that her testimony alone was a single data point, that a single data point was easy to dismiss, that a pattern was harder. She had been building a pattern without knowing that 2 other women were building the same pattern from 2 different cities, and the 3 of them had never met, and they had still managed, across that distance and that silence, to construct something that could not be explained away. She thought, "We did that, before any of this. Before the cell, before Carla Bianchi, before Luca Ferrante and his 12-minute phone call. We did that first." She went back to work. She knew about it from Carla first, and then from a brief call from a detective whose voice had the specific quality of a person performing a duty they were glad to perform. She had stood in the kitchen of her new apartment with the phone against her ear and listened to the facts delivered cleanly and without editorial. And when she hung up, she had stood very still for what might have been 30 seconds or 2 minutes and felt the specific sensation of something releasing. Not dramatically, not with the catharsis that movies suggested, but gradually, like a knot that has been worked at steadily finally giving way. She had called her mother. Her mother had said nothing for a long moment. Then she had said, very quietly, "Good." And they had stayed on the phone without speaking for another minute, which was its own kind of conversation, the kind that didn't need words because the silence was already saying everything. Carla Bianchi had been precise and relentless in her work. She had gathered the prior documentation, found both women, one in Baltimore, one in Newark, and had built a file that could not be explained away or redacted or reduced to a timeline discrepancy. The Soriano connection had produced what Luca had said it would produce. Information about Derek's financial dealings that, when examined by the right people, revealed a pattern of behavior that extended beyond the personal and into the professional, which gave the district attorney's office reasons of their own to be thorough. She didn't ask how the Soriano conversation had gone. She didn't need to know. She knew only the outcome, and the outcome was the paperwork existed, the record was real, and the next woman Derek Holt found would be able to say, "There is a pattern and it is documented and you can see it." That was the thing she had asked for. That was the thing she had gotten. Nadia sat in Carla Bianchi's office and signed documents. She was wearing her own clothes. She had found an apartment on the 9th floor of a building whose doorman she had spoken to on the first day and who had looked her in the eye without looking through her, which she had decided was a sufficient basis for trust. She had given notice at Carmen's diner, not because the diner was bad, but because it was the place where Derek had first seen her, and she had decided that new geography required new starting points. She had a job interview on Thursday at a restaurant on the other side of the city. Better hours, different neighborhood, a head chef who apparently had a rule about how he spoke to his staff that had filtered through enough reputations to be reliable. She had called her mother 3 times. She was sleeping 6 hours without dreaming, and sometimes 7. She signed the last document. Carla set it aside and looked at her directly, the way she always looked at her, that inventory gaze, efficient and humane at once. You know this doesn't end when he's convicted, Carla said. I know. He has resources. He has people. I know. You have resources too, Carla said. That's changed. Nadia considered this. It was an unusual sentence. You have resources, in the context of her life as she had understood it for the past several years. She had learned to think of herself as a woman who managed with what was available, who found the paths through the landscape rather than altering the landscape itself. The landscape had changed. She was still absorbing the fact of that, the way you absorb any fundamental shift. Slowly, in pieces, with the occasional disorientation of reaching for something and finding it not where it used to be. Yes, she said, I know that too. She saw Luca 3 weeks after the apartment, but she had heard him before that. He called on the Monday, the first day of the new job, as promised. She was on the subway on the way home, still in her work clothes, with the particular residual alertness of a first day in a new place. How was it? He said. Good, she said. The chef he's direct. He says what he means, that's rare. Yes, Luca said, it is. She watched the city past the subway window, the underground lights strobing. The prep cook asked me where I'd worked before, she said. I told him Carmine's. He said he knew the place. He asked if it was the diner with the blue awning on the east side, and I said yes, and he said his sister used to go there on Sunday mornings. She paused. I don't know why I'm telling you that. Because it's ordinary, Luca said, and ordinary is new. She thought about that. Yes, she said, that's it exactly. A brief quiet, the subway sounds around her. You'll call me if anything changes, he said. It was not a question. I will. A pause. Luca, the Soriano documents, Carla told me they came through, all of them. Yes. That was the whole thing. That was what built the case. It helped, he said. It was everything. She said it plainly, because it was true and the truth didn't need softening. I know you know that. I'm saying it anyway. The quiet again. The particular quality of a quiet that held something on both sides. Get some sleep, he said. You worked a full day. I will. She almost said thank you again, and then decided not to, because she had already said it and it had already been received, and repeating it was the kind of thing you did when you weren't sure the first time had counted. She was sure. Good night, she said instead. Good night, Nadia. She hung up and sat with the phone in her lap and the subway moving around her and understood, with the precision she brought to most things, that something had shifted. Not tonight. It had shifted earlier, in the kitchen over coffee, perhaps, or in the cell through the mesh, perhaps even earlier than that, in the specific moment she had said he'll kill me tonight into her knees, and a voice she didn't know had answered. She stored the knowledge of it the way she stored most important things, not for immediate use, but filed carefully for later. She thought about him more than was perhaps warranted by the factual nature of their contact. She thought about him specifically in the moments of competence, when she did something that went well, when she solved a problem she hadn't been able to solve before, when she walked into a room and didn't calculate exit routes. She wanted, she realized, to tell him about those moments. Not to report them, not to express gratitude, but to share them with someone who understood specifically what they cost and what they meant. She found this wanting unusual. She had not wanted to share anything with anyone in a long time. She let herself have it. The 4th week, he called and asked if she wanted to have dinner. He said it the same way he said everything, without preamble, without layering, the bare sentence placed between them. She said yes, without deliberating. They ate at a restaurant on the east side with red leather booths and candles in glass, and an owner who came out of the kitchen when Luca arrived. And there was an exchange at the door that was brief and warm in the way of men who have known each other through years of things they don't speak aloud. The owner was 60 or so, with flowers still on his sleeve, and the specific joy of a man who fed people for a living and had never grown indifferent to it. He gripped Luca's arm at the elbow, that old-world grip, and said something quietly, and Luca answered with 2 words that made the man smile and step back satisfied. She watched it and thought about what her life had not included, for 2 years, and longer, the kind of loyalty that didn't need to be performed because it was simply structural, built into the foundation. Part of what the building was made of. The food arrived in courses she hadn't ordered. She understood instinctively that this was the way things worked here. You didn't order, you were fed, because feeding someone was how this particular culture expressed care, and the kitchen already knew what was worth eating tonight. There was bread still warm from the oven. There was a pasta in a sauce that had been cooking since morning, the kind of depth of flavor that existed only in things that had been given time. There was wine, a red she didn't know the name of, poured without ceremony. She ate with appetite for the first time in weeks. She noticed this, the appetite, the absence of the low-grade nausea that had been her constant companion for a year, the way her body was simply present at the table and interested in the food rather than managing itself against some anticipated threat. She sat across from him, and he looked at her in the candlelight, her healed eye, her unsplit lip, her face which was for the first time in a long time simply her face, not a record of damage, not a surface to manage. "You look different," he said. "You mean the bruises are gone?" "No," he said, "something else." She thought about it. "I stopped calculating," she said. "In rooms, I stopped doing the exotrute thing, not entirely. Some rooms I still do it, but not this one." He looked at her and did that thing, the brief something that crossed the face and was gone, the thing that was warmer than the rest of him suggested was available. "Good," he said. They ate, they talked. He asked about the interview and she told him she'd gotten the job, starting Monday, and he said that was good with the particular quality of asterisk good that carries actual weight. She asked about his work, obliquely, carefully, in the way you ask about the outline of a thing without asking to be taken inside it, and he answered with the same precision he always used, giving her the shape without the substance, and she found that she could read the shape fairly well by now, the way you learn to read a particular handwriting. She asked him about the restaurant, this one, where they were eating, and he told her it had been open 40 years, that the owner, Marco, had started it the year his parents arrived from Palermo, that it had survived 2 fires and a recession and 3 attempts by developers to buy the building out from under it. He told her this without sentiment, in the factual register he used for everything, but the facts themselves were sentimental. The 2 fires survived, the developers rebuffed, and she read the feeling in the selection of them, in what he had chosen to tell her out of everything he could have said. "You care about it," she said, "the neighborhood." "Yes." Is that part of the business, or is it?" "It's separate," he said. "Or it started separate, now I'm not sure the line is entirely clean." He was quiet for a moment. "My grandfather walked these streets with nothing. He knew every doorway. He knew which families ate and which ones didn't, and he knew whose grandfather had come from which province and whose grandmother had died on the crossing. He kept all of it." He turned his wine glass by the stem. "That's what he left me more than anything else. Not the business, not the buildings, the knowing." She looked at him. "That's what you did in the cell," she said slowly. "That night, you listened and then you knew and then you acted." "Yes." "Is that," she stopped, tried again. "Do you always do that, for people you overhear in cells?" A corner of his mouth, not quite a smile. "No," he said. "Then why me?" He was quiet for a moment that was longer than his usual pauses. She had learned to read his pauses by then. The brief ones were just thinking. The medium ones were deciding. The longer ones were something he was assembling that he wasn't certain how to deliver. "Because," he said finally, "you weren't asking for rescue." He met her eyes. "You were doing math. You were sitting in that cell and you were calculating and planning and building contingencies in your head, and you were completely alone, and then you said that one thing into your knees, not to me, not to anyone, just into the air because the pressure of it had to go somewhere. And it was the most honest thing I'd heard anyone say in a long time." He paused. "I respect that, the honesty of it. The specific kind of courage it takes to keep doing math when the math keeps coming out wrong." She sat with this. There was something in being accurately seen that she had almost forgotten was possible. Not idealized, not diminished, seen. She thought about 14 months of being the unstable one, the volatile one, the one whose timeline had discrepancies, the one whose wrist was examined and moved past. She thought about the specific violence of being reduced to a problem someone else was managing rather than a person with interior life and intelligence and a very well-organized go-bag under the bed. My mother, she said carefully, always said I was too practical, like it was a flaw, like practicality was what you became when you couldn't be something better. Your mother's wrong about that, he said, simply, no elaboration. She picked up her wine. I know, she said. I've known for a while, it was just good to hear it said. He looked at her across the table with those dark, still eyes and the candlelight between them and the sounds of other dinners around them, and she felt for a moment, clearly and without confusion, that she was being looked at by someone who was fully present. Not managing her, not processing her, not deciding what to do with her. Just present, just looking. Just the specific quality of attention that says, I see what's here and I'm not looking for something else. At some point in the evening she realized she was not managing anything. She was not calculating, not presenting, not maintaining any particular surface. She was simply there, in the booth, in the candlelight, with coffee and half-eaten tiramisu and the sounds of other conversations around them. And it was so unremarkable in one sense and so completely remarkable in another that she sat with the knowledge of it for a moment. He noticed the shift. He was constitutionally incapable of not noticing it. What? He said. Nothing, she paused. Something, she looked at him across the table. I'm glad you were in that cell. He looked at her steadily. I'm not, he said, that you had to be. No, she agreed, but I am that you were, there's a difference. He held her gaze for a moment. The candle between them threw light up into his face and made the scar silver and his eyes darker. Yes, he said, there is. He walked her out when the meal was done. The street was cold and smelled like rain that had passed through an hour ago and left the city briefly clean. She pulled her coat around her, and he walked beside her at the particular pace of a man who is in no hurry, not because he has nowhere to be, but because the place he is currently is sufficient. They stopped at the corner, where the car would come. Monday, she said, the new job. Let me know how it goes, he said. I will. She turned to face him. In the streetlight, he looked like a man carved from something old and permanent. Luca. Yes. She had been planning to say something about gratitude, but she found she had moved past gratitude, or around it, into something more complicated that didn't have a clean word. Gratitude was for a transaction. This was not a transaction. I'll call you Monday, she said instead. Something settled in his face. A specific settling, the kind that happens when a decision is confirmed rather than made for the first time. I'll answer, he said. The car came. She got in. She watched him in the window as the car pulled away, standing at the corner with his hands in his jacket pockets, and his gaze following the car without urgency, without performance, the way a man watches something he expects to see again. She faced forward. The city moved around her, indifferent and constant, the great engine of it, streets full of people making decisions and accidents and small, irreversible choices. The night was cold and clear, and the streetlights made the wet pavement shine. She was going home to an apartment on the 9th floor where the doorman knew her name and the locks worked, and there was no go-bag under the bed because she had stopped needing one. She was going home to a Monday and a new job and a life that was, tentatively, hers to build from whatever she decided to put in it. She had $40 in her account that had become something else. She had a mother in Trenton she called 3 times a week now. She had Carla Byanch's number and a court case that had paperwork that would not disappear. She had. Somewhere behind her at that corner, a man who had heard her through concrete and had acted on it, and who drank his coffee without speaking and asked for nothing except honesty, and who had told her that her practicality was not a flaw. She had herself. She had had that all along, but it felt different now, more solid, more available, more precisely hers. She thought about what he'd said, the most honest thing I'd heard anyone say in a long time. She thought about the cell, the dark, the words into her knees that had gone nowhere and everywhere at once. She thought about the way the smallest, most private act of truth could be the thing that changed the geometry of everything. Outside, the city continued its work. And in the particular silence of the car moving through the night, she was not afraid, and she was not alone, and the road ahead was unknown in the way that roads ahead are always unknown, full of variables she couldn't control and outcomes she couldn't predict, and the exact kind of uncertainty that, she was slowly learning, was not the enemy of safety but simply the condition of living. She would figure it out. She had always been very good at math. She watched the city pass, and the city was indifferent to her in the way cities are indifferent to everyone, and she found she did not mind the indifference at all, because the indifference was not the whole of it, and she knew that now. She knew it because of a concrete wall and a steel mesh and 8 inches of gap, and a voice that had said her name in the dark. Not finished. Nothing like this was finished. But beginning. And she knew, in the way she now trusted herself to know things, that beginning was exactly enough.